Hey everyone, welcome to week 14 of class. This video is going to be an overview on what we're getting into. So let's check out our learning objectives for this week. So our learning objectives really for this entire module 5 remain the same. We are taking this time to really review and familiarize ourselves with resources about unprofessional conduct to the code of ethics, dual relationships, professional responsibilities, confidentiality, practice behaviors, what that looks like. So our learning objectives in week 14 really are the same as weeks 13 and 15. So we're taking this entire 3 weeks to really kind of get through this, to look over these materials in more depth. So let's check out this content. So continue reading the week 13 content. We will be engaging in this content for all of module 5. Here's a link to it. So be sure to review that if you need to, or if you didn't get to all of it during week 13, go back and read it. You're going to want to familiarize yourself on the NADAC Code of Ethics and read this article about self-disclosure, to do or not to do. Self-disclosure has the potential to very much help or very much hurt a relationship, and I think, or like a clinical therapeutic relationship. And there are times when it's really appropriate, and there are times when it's not appropriate. Therapy, we should be focusing on, and you're learning this in your counseling class with Emily. But really the therapeutic relationship is about the client. And so if we are bringing ourselves and our experiences into that, we need to have a really good reason why. We should be relying more heavily on evidence-based practices and engaging in those than self-disclosure. And yet there are times when self-disclosure is very appropriate. As an LAC, one of the issues that we come across a lot is whether or not to talk about if we're our status, if we are in recovery or not with our clients. And honestly, again, that has the potential to help or to hurt the therapeutic relationship. And when I was in school and preparing to do my LAC, this was something that my supervisor talked about a lot with me. And she said, Katie, prepare yourself for the question because it's coming, and it's going to come pretty frequently. And it's not. And what I realized is that when the question comes, it is often generally because the client wants to connect in a more deeper way. Generally. And that was great, but it was really helpful to be able to kind of prepare how I was going to answer that and what I was going to say. And so I'll share a story. Really early on, I was running a group, and we were kind of waiting for group to happen, and people were kind of coming in and out. And one of the members of the group said, "Hey, Katie, are you in recovery?" And I said, "You know what? Thanks for asking that question. That's a really good question," because I wanted to normalize and validate it. I didn't want to further shame this person for asking a question that I wasn't going to answer. And I said, "Let's start group with that today." And so people kind of walked in, and I recapped. I said, "Hey, this question was posed to me, and I want to talk more about it." And I said, "So my answer is, I don't actually answer that question." And I said, "The reason I don't answer that question is because I don't know how people are going to respond to that. And I don't know if it's going to be helpful or hurtful. What do you guys think? If I am in recovery, how do you feel about that? If I'm not in recovery, how do you feel about that?" And it was this really fruitful, great discussion about, some of the group, and the majority of the group said, hey, you know what? I would really like, you know what, if you are in recovery, that tells me that you can empathize and know more about that. And so we were able to have a discussion about, do you think that you truly have to have walked somebody else's shoes to be empathetic to them, and then use it to be back at the group process? Like maybe you've never experienced, this was a group of men and women, and you've never experienced what it was like to be a pregnant woman with a substance abuse problem. But do you think that you can empathize even though you weren't a woman? And so having that conversation about, do we really need to walk someone's exact path to be able to empathize and to be open to that? And then we had other conversations where a few other people in the group had said, I actually don't want a therapist in recovery. I want somebody who isn't a mess like me, was really kind of their words that they were using. And so we processed that a little bit, like, wow, as a person in recovery, how much self-stigma do you have, when you're saying these words like, I don't want you to be a mess like me. And so how do you really conceptualize yourself as a person in treatment and a person in recovery? And can we reframe that from a space of really being self-deprecating and self-shaming to a place of empowerment and ownership? How many other things have you done that have been harder than coming to treatment? So for people who aren't in recovery, how many like, we all do hard things, but like, can you own this, and can you give yourself credit for the challenge that this is? And so it was just this really great discussion. And so I offer that as an example for you to just kind of start contemplating as you are considering self-disclosure. Another big thing that happens is it's very common for people in our profession to come from a background in substance use. And so I say that because there's this shift that happens coming from somebody who was in mutual support groups, and that mutual support and what those kind of boundaries look like, and then somebody who's maybe doing peer support and what those boundaries look like. And now I'm becoming an LAC, and what those boundaries look like, and how I use my sense of self in that setting is actually different as an LAC than it is as a peer support specialist, or it is as a sponsor, or somebody walking alongside somebody together in their paths of recovery. So those things, those relationships and those expectations are actually shifting as you move into this new role as a licensed addiction counselor. So just some things to think about. If you want to meet and have a more robust conversation about that, let's do it. Let's talk more about it. But it is something that I do anticipate for everybody will be, that self-disclosure piece will be a topic of supervision when you are engaged in practice and supervision. This is a really important topic. And then lastly, I think this is really timely: social media and ethical dilemmas for behavioral health clinicians. Guess what? It depends whether or not your engagement in social media with clients is actually different. The expectations are different based on your licensure. So really read through these NADAC Code of Ethics and see what it says about social media and friend requests or connecting with clients on social media. Also think about that in terms of confidentiality rules that we've learned, HIPAA 42 CFR Part 2, and how, again, as the therapist or the counselor, we are in the source of power. So when a client sends us or a past client or a current client sends us like a friend request on Facebook, for example, there's this power piece. And they also might not realize that they're giving up some of their anonymity and some of their confidentiality by sending that request. So as counselors, what is our responsibility? And we're going to get into some of those topics a little more also during week 15. So really important content to engage in. So again, engage in this content very heavily. And so what are we doing for assignments this week? So again, we are engaging in the course material that I just went over. There'll be a discussion forum, and I'll post a video down here to cover that, to discuss that forum. And then next week is our final week of content in the course. So I'll talk more about that during next week. So that's it for our week 14 overview. Thanks for watching this video. Head on over to that homepage, ask questions. Let me know if you need to engage in this in more detail. We could definitely connect. So thanks everybody. I'm looking forward to your questions.